Hello friends, welcome to Awdhesh Academy. Friends, we have learned about the international morality, international ethics. We have learned that in the international arena, the countries are like individuals, persons or peoples, and they should live like a citizen in a society. And we know that in every society there is give and take. The person who has wealth try to share the wealth with the person who is poor. They normally do a charity or they do some sort of social activity by which they can share their wealth, knowledge and other things. In the same way, in the international arena also, the international funding is very, very important for helping the poor countries or the developing countries to improve themselves and come to a level where the people are happy in these countries also. So we have to first understand that in this world there has been a wide divide. The north-south divide is getting bigger. North-south divide can be said to be a divide between the rich country and the poor country. Normally you will find that north of the globe will have the rich countries and the south of the globe is having poor country. That is why it is called north-south divide, but basically it means that rich and poor country divide. Today 20% of the world population consists of 80% of the world resources. This situation cannot be allowed to continue. We have to spread the wealth. And the peace requires that economic integration between different nations should take place, so that when we are attacking some country, where a powerful country think of attacking another country, then it will be careful because its own business interest will be involved in those countries. So it is very important that there is an international funding to the developing countries, because as the world is becoming a global village, the nations are becoming like its people. And just like a nation bridges the inequality of its people by taxing the rich and sharing that tax to the poor people, the rich countries may provide international funding to the poor countries to reduce the inequality. There should be a strong international relationship to be built by integrating the economies of each country, so that no country would try to destroy or harm other country because its own interest will be harmed in that process. And therefore the war and conflict can be reduced if the countries get interconnected with each other and interdependent with each other. So that is also one important purpose of international funding. So the new dimensions of international policy can be listed as following. Number one, transfer of resources from rich countries to the less developed nation. Removing economic exchange inequality in trade, commerce and finances between developed and underdeveloped nations. Then there should be a greater voice of the developed nation in the working of international agencies. The next goal is humanitarian assistance to countries suffering from famine or miseries. Then it was also provided that intervention in states which carry out genocides, ethnic cleansing, etc., or war on its own people. So the world community cannot sit silently when the ruler of a particular country or the dictator of a particular country is carrying out genocides against its own people. So the international morality also means that there should be naturalization of migrated people. If people have migrated to a particular country, then they should be naturalized, they should be given the citizenship of that particular country. Further, we should adopt the cosmopolitan approach of morality. It means that the international morality should be based on the moral values of all the societies and not particular to a particular country or a powerful country. Now, when we are talking about the international morality, the international cooperation does not have any meaning unless the people cooperate with each other. The rich countries and the poor countries try to help each other achieving their objectives. So the international morality means that the rich nations must help the poor nations. And the multinational institutions like World Bank, International Monetary Fund must promote the international cooperation and assistance between the rich countries and the poor countries, so that they are mutually benefited from each other. Then the United Nations has set up a Millennium Development Goal in the year 2000, where they adopted 8 Millennium Development Goals. These development goals were to be achieved by 2015. And all 191 United Nations members state of that time and at least 22 international organizations committed to help achieve these goals. There has been 8 objectives of Millennium Development Goals 2000, and these are as following: eradicate extreme poverty, achieve universal primary education, promote gender equality, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health, combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, etc., these serious type of disease, ensure economic sustainability, and develop a global partnership for development. So 2015 was set to be the time for achieving these goals, and the result has been mixed. Some progress has been made for reaching the goals, but it has been quite uneven across countries. Brazil achieved many of the goals. However, some countries like Benin are not on track to realize any of the goals. The major successful countries were China and India. Between 1990 and 2010, the population living on less than $1.25 a day in developing countries halved to 21%, or 1.2 billion people, achieving the goal before the target date. So this has been one of the greatest achievement, because even before the date, the per capita income or the income of the poor people has increased. The child mortality and the maternal mortality were down by less than half. So here also we have been able to make considerable progress. Sanitation and education targets were, however, not achieved. So it's going to take some more time to achieve these targets. In addition to this, there has been a Monterrey Consensus in 2002. This Monterrey Consensus emerged out of a meeting of the International Conference on Financing for Development in Monterrey, Mexico in March 2002. The new partnership for global development was conceived by more than 50 heads of state, World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization. The development and developing countries agreed to take joint action for poverty reduction in this particular context, and developing countries to take the responsibility for their own poverty reduction programs, and the necessity of the rich countries to support their endeavor with more open trade and increased financial aid. The key decisions which were taken in the Monterrey Conference are as following: new partnership between the rich and poor nations for development, rich countries to increase aid for the poor countries. It was also decided that developing nations should undertake the reforms to improve the aid effectiveness. They should not become a party just to receive the aid. They should also do the internal reform to receive these aids. Rich countries to reform their trade policies to help poor countries and allow the market access to poor countries, so that the poor countries can also sell their goods and provide the services into these countries. Advanced countries should allow liberal entry to the knowledge worker. This has seen to be a greatest barrier, because the rich countries don't allow the poor countries people to come and do jobs over there. So they should allow the knowledge worker to come and work over there. Rich countries must bear the main burden of protection of the environment, because the developing countries or the poor countries cannot bear that burden. So whenever there is a responsibility for environment degradation, then the rich countries should bear the burden to the most. So today we have learned about the importance of international funding and the different conventions which has been done in this regard. What is the importance of international funding for removing the inequality and creating a better world? Thank you very much for watching the lesson. Friends, we have learned about international funding. We know that international funding is an integrated part of international morality. But the question arises, why should one country give funding to another country? And why should a country receive funding from a developed country? So this is a very interesting question. Why should there be a foreign assistance or foreign funding? So today we are going to learn about the benefits of foreign economic assistance, and that will be from the perspective of the donor and also from the perspective of the recipient. So let's proceed for this particular lesson. So let's understand what is the benefit of foreign economic assistance. Friends, we know that in the globalized world, countries may be compared with neighbors, just like we live in a neighborhood, in a society, in a colony. In the same way, the world can be compared as a society where the countries are like neighbors. Now, in order to live harmoniously, they must share with each other their resources and skills. When resources flow among countries, it enhances global economic efficiency and welfare in both rich and poor countries. So let's understand by an analogy. For example, if you are a rich person, you have lots of wealth. What is the use of the wealth? Unless you are able to put that wealth into some sort of use. Now, in the same society, suppose there is a poor person also. Now, the poor person has labor, has skill, but he doesn't have wealth. You have wealth and you want to maximize the wealth. In that situation, suppose you employ that person with you. You give some wealth to that person and utilize some of the skills for you. In that situation, what will happen? That you can use your own time and energy in doing something more productive, and therefore you can multiply your own wealth. At the same time, the poor fellow who doesn't have a job will get a job and he will also start earning money. So in this process, you find that when you are transferring the wealth, being a rich person to a poor person, it is not that you are a loser, because in the process you are also gaining something and the poor person is also gaining something. And this is a mutual win-win situation, and that will create a better society because we are all integrated with each other and we are happy. Therefore, the flow of funds from rich people to poor people or from rich country to poor country helps both the parties. Now, the flow of capital may take place either directly or through multilateral agencies to ensure that the benefit accrue to both developed and developing countries. So, ultimately, it is a win-win situation. Sometime the developed country will provide the funds directly. Sometime they will provide through international agencies, which will ensure that the benefit is actually both-sided. Now, let us now first focus on the benefits to the donors, the countries which are giving donation or the foreign assistance. Now, in many cases, you must have seen that the donation which is given by the developed country is not in the form of money. It is in the forms of goods and services. For example, if you talk about the donation which has been given by Japan to India in respect of the bullet train project is mostly in the form of the goods and the services. And therefore, if such type of assistance is given, it promotes the export in the donor country and it increases the employment in the donor country. So that way, that is the first benefit which the donor country gets. Then the donor country also provides food assistance to poor countries, which may benefit the farmer of the domestic country. So often the assistance is in the form of food, and there again the farmers of the donor country benefits. Similarly, in the donor countries, the industries gain from the contract which are associated with infrastructure development projects. So like we have this bullet train, highways, railways. So whenever such infrastructure development take place, then the countries which give the donation, their industries benefit because they will be supplying the material and they will also be supplying you the technical know-how. Now, this benefit is not only when you are supplying at that particular time, but this benefit continues in future also, because as the recipient country's infrastructure develops, commercial demand for new and replacement equipment widens the commercial sale opportunities. So once the train is in place, once a particular product is in place, whether it is car or anything like that, in that situation what happens that there is a continuous demand of that product, and so the industries continue to get benefit in future also. At the same time, the companies in the donor country also gain by providing technical assistance to the recipient country, from where they get regular royalty on their intellectual property. So when a country provides technical assistance, they get the royalty on the intellectual property right, and that's a permanent benefit which the donor countries' industries keep on getting. It is not only that the donation is given only for the purpose of benefiting the industries, but there are political and strategic interest also in the whole process. Now, this development assistance is a useful complement to donors' political strategy as it strengthens the political commitment of the aid recipient. Because if we provide donation to the poor country or the country which needs that money, definitely there is a political commitment from that country. Then it will support us because it is dependent upon us. So that's one benefit which the donor country gets. So now let us take one example. You know that after the Second World War, the Europe was almost totally destroyed. And in that situation, it was desperate to get assistance. Now America formed a Marshall Plan. And through that Marshall Plan, its industries and the government participated in the development of the Western Europe particularly, which was totally destroyed because of the World War. Now this basically has strengthened the capacity of the Western Europe to resist the external aggression, because the communist countries would not be able to attack the Western European countries because they will be monetary and militarily more powerful. But at the same time, it also has a benefit because it was actually coming to the same ideology, and that was the ideology of America, that is the ideology of democracy. And so you can see that practically in the entire Western Europe, you have democracy. So friends, so that way you can see that Marshall Plan has been serving both political as well as strategic interest, because the Western countries emerged as a bloc. And today you can see that we have European Union because the ideology got similar, and so they were able to come together at some time later. So therefore, we can see that this particular type of foreign assistance also helps the political and strategic interest of the donor country. However, there is a danger that the donor country may pursue their self-interest under the garb of aid, even if it harms the recipient country. So when the recipient country is quite poor and not able to negotiate properly, then sometimes the donor country may perpetuate its own political interest. Now let us understand how the recipient countries benefit in this foreign assistance program. The first thing is that the recipient countries are benefited due to the cheaper labor which can be used to reduce the cost of production of goods and services. So this is the benefit, because when the industries are there in a poor country, people get job. Why they get job? Because the labor is poor, and so that basically benefit the industry. And therefore, they are interested in setting up the industry in the poorer country where the wages are low. At the same time, they get the latest technology and expertise which are developed by the industries in the developed world after a huge investment. Once you start producing those goods, automatically you know the technical know-how as well, and so the R&D expenditure is saved. Later they can improve upon the know-how using their own in-house R&D facilities and then compete with the developed economies. And in the past, the China, Korea and Japan, they use the technical knowledge of the Western world, and they have created the world-class products and sold all over the world. And therefore, they were able to capture the world market by making better quality products at a cheaper price. And India also, we can see that has been tremendously benefited after the liberalization policy, when we started getting assistance from the World Bank, IMF, and started getting assistance from other countries. And today, India has become one of the fastest growing economy. So friends, we can see that this international assistance help both the developed countries and the developing countries, the donor country and the recipient country, and the industries in both the countries. So this is a win-win proposition, and that is why this foreign assistance has become extremely important as far as the international morality is concerned. Thank you very much. Friends, in the last lesson, we have learned about the benefits of international funding to the donor country and their industries and business, and the donor country and their industries and business. But the physical benefits are not the only reason why there is an international funding. Often the funding is given without any subsequent benefit either to the business or to the industries. Sometimes the funding is given for the ethical consideration only. Just like sometimes a rich person gives charity to the poor people without expecting anything in return, purely for the ethical consideration. So today we are going to learn about the ethical consideration to the donation or the international funding. So let's understand the ethical considerations to donation. Friends, whenever a developed country gives any sort of donation to the developing country, that comes from the revenue which is paid by the taxpayer of that particular country. And therefore, it is only natural that the citizens will question the act of donation of their money. Because you see what happens that many citizens believe that the resources which are devoted to the foreign assistance are wasted because often the assistance fails to achieve the intended economic and political objective. So they believe that this is our money. Why you are giving to the other country? So unless they are convinced that it is going to achieve some economic or political objective, they will not be willing to give that donation. They also feel that it is wrong for any government to forcefully extract resources from the citizens to transfer them to foreigner when the same can be used for the citizen of the country. Ultimately, whatever donation is given, if the same resources are used within the same country, the citizens will benefit. But if it is used in other countries, it will not benefit. So why should they pay? That is the question they ask. Therefore, we can understand that the foreign aids basically needs justification on ethical ground because such a transfer may be at the expense of the reduction in expenditure in the donor country. And so unless there is some sort of ethical benefits are there, some sort of ethical reasons are there, they will not be very much willing to give the donation to the poor countries. There are basically two types of justification which are given. The first is basically called the entitlement and the second is called the distributive justice principle. So let's first understand the concept of entitlement. Now, according to this particular principle, people believe that there should be compensation by the rich countries to the poor countries for the past injustices which are stemming from political domination and economic exploitation. We know that in the past, the developed countries or the rich countries of today have dominated and colonized the poor countries and exploited them. So it is believed that the poor countries are entitled for some sort of compensation. For example, Great Britain and France exploited their former colonies and they must compensate for the losses which they have done to these countries. The problem here is that there is a difficulty to establish the extent of exploitation because these countries claim that they have done much more development during their colonization regime. For example, if you talk about India, then the British rule has not only exploited India, but also caused lots of development like railways, judicial system, and so many other things like telegraph, schooling, universities, which has been done during that regime. So this is a little controversial because the poor countries will say they have been exploited, but the rich countries will say, no, they have not exploited, but rather they have helped those nations develop. The second form of entitlement is because of the natural resources. It is believed that natural resources are part of our global heritage and that those areas which are favorably endowed with these natural resources have an obligation to share rents with those areas that are less favorably endowed. So we know that in certain areas you have oil, certain areas you have minerals, certain areas you have much more natural resources, while other areas don't have those resources. So it is believed that since the resources are common to the entire world, therefore those who are having more resources must share some of the benefits to the countries which do not have the resources. But here also there are difficulties because it is very difficult to decide the way to be given to the natural resources distribution. How we are going to distribute among the different countries, that's very difficult to decide. And also it has been found that these resources are not a very powerful factor in explaining the differential growth rates. And many countries like Japan, Singapore, they develop without much natural resources. So it cannot be said that natural resources are the reason for development of the countries. And therefore, this theory also is contested
nevertheless, the entitlement claim is there from the poor countries that yes, we have been exploited or we don't have the natural resources, therefore we must get something from those who are having it. The second aspect of this particular ethical angle is called distributive justice. And this is basically on the principle of utilitarian, because it believes that we should maximize the happiness of the world. And so the countries which has more money, they should share their money with the poorer countries. And we know that this distributive justice or this utilitarian principle is used within the country as a justification for taxing the people who are earning higher income and distribute that money to the poor, because that maximizes the happiness of the whole society. So the same principle should be used internationally, and the rich countries must pay to the poor countries. That is the purpose of the distributive justice. Now it can be understood in two ways. For example, if the private rates of return to capital investments are higher in the developing countries than in the developed countries, the investment should flow from the developed to the less developed countries. Now, if suppose you are getting lesser rate of return, if you use your own capital in the country where you are having the industry, but if you invest that in a developing country, you get more return, then naturally there is a justification that why not invest that in the developing country, because the businesses will be more prosperous. The second justification is that if the social rate of return exceeds the private rates of return, then developed country government should transfer resources to the developing countries to assist in physical and institutional infrastructure development. Now, when the government invests that money in their own country, they get certain return. This could be in the terms of ethical consideration, could be in the form of social welfare or any other form. Now, if they invest the same amount of money in a poor country, much more benefit can come. The meaning is that suppose America want to spend $1 billion for the social benefits in their own country. Let us say that it will benefit, say, 1 lakh people. But if the same amount of money is spent in a poor country, in South Africa, let us say Nigeria, then many more people can be benefited. So the social rate of returns is much higher when the money is invested in a poor country. And so that is also considered to be one of the major motivating factor for the countries to spend in the poor countries. But there is a counter view of this also. It says that this is basically a flawed concept. There can be no distributive justice as far as the resource sharing of goods and services are concerned between different countries. They say that justice has meaning only as a rule of human conduct. In a society of free men, the concept of social and distributive justice has no meaning, because we cannot make any rule. There cannot be any conceivable rule for the conduct of individuals supplying each other in a market economy, which will produce a distribution which can be meaningfully described as just or unjust. That means when in a market economy we share the resources, goods are sold or purchased, they are sold or purchased on the basis of the market factors and not on the basis of justice principle. Sometimes the producer of the goods can charge huge profit, and that way you can say that he is getting unjust profit. But sometimes what happens that he is not able to even recover the cost and make losses. So that way the concept of justice and injustice does not happen as far as the market economies are concerned. It is basically something which is in the human conduct only we can talk about justice. And therefore this concept of distributive justice is not sustainable. That is the counter argument about this particular ethical theory. So friends, we have today learned about the different type of ethical theories which are there in the matter of the foreign funding. I hope that you got the good idea of that. Thank you very much. International finance is very, very important part of international morality, because it is not only sufficient that in a society, in a country, the people who are rich support the people who are poor so that everybody lives a respectable life, but it is also important that the developed countries of this world support the poor countries of this world so that every human being is able to live a dignified life. In this regard, the United Nations had been organizing a different type of conferences where the developed and developing nation come together, they discuss and they decide as to how we are going to create a better world which is more ethical, more equitable and more just. In this regard, in 2015, UN conference was held for the purpose of sustainable development, and today we are going to know about it. So let us know first the background of 2015 UN conference. We know that in the year 2000, United Nations has organized a Millennium Summit in which Millennium Development Goals were set. There were 8 international development goals which were set in 2000 and it was to be completed in 2015. We have learned about the progress of these goals in our earlier lessons. So what has happened after 2015? So another UN conference was organized in the year 2015 and we are going to discuss about that today. In July 2015, the third UN conference on financing for development was held in Addis Ababa, capital of Ethiopia. The Addis Ababa Action Agenda adopted there takes the international finance for development architecture forward from the earlier conferences at Monterrey and Doha. It provided a solid framework for the implementation of the new global development goals that were adopted in September 2015 as part of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So friends, here the focus was shifted. We want to have a sustainable development for the world. And so the agenda of 2015 was to take care of the next 15 years, that is 2030, and it was the agenda for sustainable development. There are basically 3 focus areas in this conference. The first was assessing the progress made in the implementation of the Monterrey Consensus and Doha Declaration and identifying obstacles and constraints encountered in achievement of the goals and objective which has been agreed thereon, as well as actions and initiatives to overcome these constraints. So in this particular conference, one of the focus area was to assess what we have done in last 15 years, what has been the progress of that. So those things were to be assessed and that was one of the focus areas. The second was to address new and emerging issues, including in the context of recent multilateral efforts to promote international development cooperations, which involve the following: the current evolving development cooperation landscape, the interrelationship of all sources of development finance, and the synergies between financing objective across the 3 dimensions of sustainable development and the need to support the United Nations Development Agenda beyond 2015. Another focus area was reinvigorating and strengthening the financing for development follow-up process. So these are basically the 3 focus areas of this UN conference. This UN conference has all-round participation. It gathered high-level political representatives, including head of states and government and Minister of Finance, Foreign Affairs and Development Corporations, as well as all relevant institutional stakeholders, non-government organizations and business sector entities. So it was a widely attended conference where people from developed and developing countries all participated. Now let us know about the outcome of this particular conference. This conference has given a new global framework for financing sustainable development that aligns all financial flows and policies with economic, social, and environmental priorities. Another outcome of this conference was a comprehensive set of policy actions by member states with a package of over 100 concrete measures that draw upon all sources of finance, technology, innovation, trade, and data in order to support mobilization of the means of a global transformation to sustainable development and achievement of these sustainable development goals. So this has provided a set of policy, more than 100 in nature, where the sustainable development goals were to be achieved. The Addis agenda that was taken after this particular conference represent a move away from the outdated donor-recipient dichotomy to new global partnership for sustainable development. So in the earlier, there was a relationship between the donor and the recipient. So that relationship was changed and it became an agenda where there was a partnership between the different countries for having sustainable development for the world. Let us now know about the salient features of Addis agenda, which was after this particular conference. The first was the closer link between the international development and climate agenda. Because we know that climate has become an issue and it is an important issue for the entire world. So there was a close link has to be made between the international development and the climate agenda, because we should not sacrifice the climate for haphazard and uncontrolled international development. Importance of domestic and private resources for financing sustainable development. That means if you want to finance this sustainable development, it is not only the government support but also the international support. It is the domestic funding also has to be done and the private funding also has to be done in this. So that was given due importance in this particular conference. It looks closely at the non-financial issues that are crucial for sustainable development, which include technology transfer and international trade. So the sustainable development cannot be made purely by giving the donations. It includes many non-financial measures. For example, there should be technology transfer so that the recipient country or the poor countries can develop that technology, use that technology and improve their performance. In the same way, there should be international trade between the developing and the developed countries and between them so that there is a mutually beneficial proposition for all of them. In this particular conference also saw that Germany and other international partners launched an Addis tax initiative to support developing countries in enhancing their tax and custom system so that they are able to increase their tax to GDP ratios in the long term. So this is an important step which has been taken, because in this particular case what has happened that the German government has given the know-how to increase the taxes because they have provided them a better system, and if the tax of the particular country improves, then naturally the country will have more resources to garner and more resources to deploy for the benefit of its people. So the German government has considerably increased its international cooperation on public finance and taxes. This is also one of the important highlights of this conference. So friends, today we have learned about the 2015 UN Conference for Sustainable Development of the World, its agendas and its success, and we are hoping for a better world by 2030 when this particular conference will be able to produce its full result by 2030. Thank you very much for watching this lesson.